person in Bsangpo's crew was failed by an adult before they ever threw a single punch. That's not a fan theory. That's the entire architecture of Windbreaker. On the surface, Windbreaker looks like a classic delinquent story. Gangs, territory, fights, boys being boys. That's the packaging. That's what gets you in the door. But Jo Young-sok, the Manhwa artist, is doing something a lot more precise underneath. Every fight in Windbreaker is a negotiation over who gets to be safe and who doesn't. And Bsangpo, the guy most readers write off as the hothead, the muscle, the comic relief brawler, Bsangpo is the character who understands that negotiation better than anyone. When was the last time Bsangpo started a fight? Think about it. Actually think about it, because I went back through the whole series and what I found completely changed how I read him. Bsangpo doesn't start fights. He finishes threats. There's a difference, and it's the most important distinction in the entire series. Let's establish something first, because if you're only casually reading Windbreaker, Bsangpo reads as a type, the loud one, the one who charges in, the one Jay has to pull back. That's the mask, and it's a deliberate mask. It's performing exactly the thing that keeps people at a safe distance, aggression as a social strategy. We know from developmental psychology that children who grow up in unpredictable or unsafe environments often develop what's called a hypervigilant attachment style. They learn to scan constantly for threat. And they learn that the best defense against being hurt is to look like the most dangerous thing in the room. Bsangpo wears that mask so well that even the people closest to him spend half the series misreading him. He performs loudness. He performs not caring. He performs being easy to dismiss. And while everyone's looking at the performance, he's watching the room. He's clocked every exit, every threat, every person who looks like they're about to get hurt. That's not a delinquent's instinct. That's a protector's instinct, refined by years of needing it. Found family is a term that gets used a lot in fandom. It's warm. It's hopeful. It makes for good fan art. But found family in Windbreaker isn't warm, not at its roots. It's desperate. These kids didn't choose each other because they were similar. They chose each other because they had nobody else. And Bsangpo's role in that structure isn't the fun one. He's not the heart of the group. He's the perimeter. He's the reason the group can afford to have a heart. Think about what that requires. To be the person who absorbs the first hit so no one else has to. To be the person who makes himself readable as a threat so that the people behind him don't have to be threatening at all. That is a self-assigned role. Nobody told Bsangpo to do this. He chose it, which means at some point, probably early, he decided that the most valuable thing he could offer the people he cared about was his willingness to be the thing that stood between them and everything else. That is not a delinquent psychology. That is a caregiver psychology expressed through the only language the world gave him. Windbreaker doesn't give Bsangpo a dramatic backstory scene. He doesn't get a crying flashback with swelling music. His history is handed to you in pieces. Side comments, reactions, things the other characters don't seem to register as significant, but absolutely are. And what those pieces add up to is this. Bsangpo grew up in a context where the adults in charge weren't safe, where protection wasn't something you received, it was something you had to manufacture yourself or go without. This is not speculation. The text shows you this through his relationship with authority, not defiance. That's the surface read. Watch his actual behavior around adults who have power over him. He doesn't rebel. He positions. He creates distance. He makes himself hard to reach before they can decide whether they want to hurt him or not. That's a trauma response. Specifically, it's a preemptive one. Clinical literature on children who've experienced adult negligence or unpredictability describes it almost exactly. The child learns to neutralize threats before they materialize, because waiting to see if it's safe has historically been too costly. Bsangpo doesn't wait to see if people are safe. He assumes they aren't and acts accordingly until they prove otherwise. And the only people who have ever proven otherwise are standing behind him. He's not protecting them despite his past. He's protecting them because of it. Here's the pushback, and it's a fair one. If Bsangpo is a trauma response walking around in a school uniform, does Windbreaker glorify that? Is the series saying, take your pain, weaponize it, and use it to punch people, and that's growth? It's a real question, especially in Manhwa, where the visual spectacle of fighting is part of the genre's appeal. You can't pretend the punches aren't satisfying to look at. But here's where Jo Young-seok does something more honest than most delinquent manhwa. Windbreaker doesn't let the violence be clean. It doesn't let Bsangpo walk away from a fight and have that be the end of it. There's always a cost. There's always something unresolved that the fight didn't actually fix. The violence is not the healing. The violence is the symptom. The healing, what little Windbreaker allows its characters, comes from the moments in between. The ordinary moments. The moments where nobody needs protecting, and Bsangpo doesn't know what to do with himself. Watch those scenes. They're brief, but they're the whole point. Identity beyond the fight. The unanswered question. Who is Bsangpo when no one needs protecting? The series doesn't fully answer this, and I think that's intentional. Because Bsangpo doesn't fully answer this either. There's a particular kind of loneliness in building your entire identity around being useful to others. It feels like strength from the outside, but it requires never asking, what do I want? What am I separate from what I do for other people? This is actually the most Korean aspect of his character, and it connects to something broader in manhwa as a genre, which your channel has been mapping really well across different series. Korean culture has a specific name for the duty before self-orientation, nunchi, the constant awareness of others' states and needs, often at the cost of your own. It's usually discussed as a social skill, but in Bsangpo it functions as a survival mechanism that was never turned off. He reads every room because he had to learn to read every room. He orients around others because orienting around himself was a luxury he was never given. Windbreaker gestures at this, in the quieter moments, in the scenes that don't make the highlight reels, without ever making it a lecture. And that restraint is what makes Bsangpo land as a character rather than a case study. You feel the weight of his identity before you can name it. And the name, when you find it, is a boy who decided that love looks like standing between people and the things that could hurt them. The broader thesis. What Windbreaker is really about. Windbreaker is a series about what boys become when institutions fail them. Not evil, not broken, though they're working through damage. They become each other's institutions. They build, in the space that was supposed to be held by adults and systems, their own rules, their own hierarchies, their own codes of protection. Bsangpo is the most honest expression of that dynamic in the series. He didn't become a fighter because he loved fighting. He became a fighter because fighting was the only infrastructure available for the thing he needed to be. Someone who makes sure the people he loves don't get hurt. And that's why labeling him a delinquent is such a profound misread. A delinquent rejects the social contract. Bsangpo has a more rigorous social contract than most of the adults in this series. He just wrote it himself. Rule 1. No one I care about gets hurt while I'm standing. Everything else in his character is a footnote to that rule. The question Windbreaker leaves. Open. Here's what Windbreaker hasn't answered yet. And it might be the most important question in the series. What happens to a protector when the people they protect stop needing protecting? This is the developmental question underneath Bsangpo's arc. Because the crew is getting stronger. Jae is getting stronger. The threat landscape is changing. And at some point, The series is building towards this. There will be a moment where Bsangpo stands up to absorb a hit and nobody needs him to do it anymore. Visuals. Hold on a quiet panel. Something that feels like the beginning of something, not the end of something. Open loop 5. Resolved. Circle back to the opening. Every person in his crew was failed by an adult. Now answer it. We opened on this. Every person in Bsangpo's crew was failed by an adult before they ever threw a punch. The series gives you Bsangpo's answer to that fact. You become the thing that was missing. You become reliable. You become present. You become the person who shows up, not because someone told you to, but because you understand in your body what it costs when nobody does. That's not a delinquent. That's someone who looked at a system that failed him, decided it was wrong, and built the alternative with his own hands and his own willingness to take damage. Windbreaker doesn't always give that arc the credit it deserves, but it's there, in every panel where Bsangpo steps forward while everyone else steps back. Watch for it now. You won't be able to unsee it. If this is the kind of analysis you're here for, the part of Manhwa that doesn't make the recap channels, subscribe, and drop a comment with the character you want me to dissect next. I've already done the real psychology behind Sung Jinwoo's emotional shutdown and why every Manhwa hero pushes people away. Links are on screen. If Bsangpo landed for you, the Jinwoo video goes even deeper into the same territory. I'll see you there.